The device shouldn't have worked yet. Lex Luthor stood in the Gotham safehouse basement, hands moving across holographic interfaces that flickered between stable and dying. Batman watched from the shadows, cape pooling at his feet like spilled ink. Neither man spoke. The mother box fragment hummed on the central platform, wrapped in a lattice of stolen Speed Force conduits that pulsed with energy they'd pulled from Flash's old tech. "Calibration's off," Lex said. His voice carried no inflection. "The dimensional frequency won't lock." "Then shut it down." Batman's tone didn't rise. It never did anymore. "I'm trying." The hum climbed to a whine. Reality folded at the edges of the room, geometry bending in ways that human vision rejected. Lex's fingers danced faster. The Speed Force conduits blazed yellow-white, and something in the lattice cracked with a sound, like frozen metal shattering. "Lex, I know," the mother box screamed. Space tore open above the platform, a wound in the air that bled colors the basement had never contained. Wind howled from nowhere, pulling at Batman's cape, at Lex's coat, at everything not bolted to concrete. Through the rift came light and noise and the shape of something falling. Not something, someone. The figure hit the platform, hard-rolled, came up in a crouch with one hand braced against metal. Young. Maybe 16, maybe 18, wearing a jacket that looked like it had seen better days, and jeans that definitely had. His other hand went to his wrist, to a device there that looked nothing like the tech filling the basement. The rift sealed behind him with a sound like a door slamming in a cathedral. Silence rushed back, and broken only by the mother box's dying whine as Lex finally killed the power. The kid stared at them. His hand stayed on the wrist device. "Okay," he said. "That's new." Batman moved forward 3 steps, stopped when the kid's stance shifted defensive. "Who are you?" "Ben? Ben Tennyson." The name came out steady despite the kid's eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. "Where am I?" "Gotham." Lex powered down the holographics, but his posture stayed rigid. "What Earth?" Ben blinked. What dimension? What reality?" Lex's patience had limits. They'd just been reached. The device was calibrated to pull a specific Justice League from a parallel Earth. "You're not them." "Yeah, I got that part." Ben straightened, hands still on the watch. "I was in Bellwood. Then I was falling through something that looked like..." He stopped. Looked at the platform, at the mother box fragment, at the residual energy still crackling in the air. "You were trying to open a portal." "We succeeded," Batman said. "Wrong target." The watch on Ben's wrist flickered green. For half a second, something changed in the kid's eyes. Something that suggested he was having a very different conversation than the one his mouth was conducting. Then he focused again. "Okay. So, send me back." "Can't." Lex moved to a side console, pulling up data streams. The scars active. Year 3 instability Trigon and Mexwise Palkai tore reality when they fought. We patched it barely, but the Speed Force energy just peeled the wound open again. Another jump right now would turn you inside out. Ben processed that. His hand left the watch. "How long?" "Unknown." Batman stepped closer, studying the device on Ben's wrist with the focus he'd once reserved for evidence at crime scenes. "What is that?" "Personal." The word came out flat. Not hostile, but absolute. Lex pulled up a street-level feed on the console. Gotham sprawled across the screen, but not the Gotham of 5 years ago. Drones moved in formation above the ruins of Crime Alley. Speakers mounted on every corner broadcast the same message on loop: curfew at 8 compliance, mandatory resistance is terror. The sky showed red at the edges, pollution or something worse. Ben stared at the screen. "What happened here?" "War." Batman's voice could have cut glass. "Superman decided peace required force. Most people agreed. The ones who didn't?" He gestured at the screen, at the ruins, at the world outside. "You're standing in what's left of the opposition." "Superman." Ben said it like he was testing a word in a foreign language. "As in, the Superman." "There's only one now," Lex said. "The others are dead or compliant, mostly compliant." A new alert flashed across the console. Lex's jaw tightened. "Cyborg just flagged an anomalous energy signature. He's tracing it here." Batman's hand went to his belt. "How long?" "Minutes, maybe less." Lex started wiping the console's memory fingers, moving with the speed of long practice. "He'll have drones, probably a tactical squad. If they scan the kid, they'll want the watch," Batman finished. He looked at Ben. "Can you fight?" "Depends." Ben's hand drifted back to the device. "What's the regime's policy on non-lethal?" "They don't have one." Ben's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Calculation, maybe. Or the kind of math you do when all the answers come up wrong." "Then yeah," he said. "I can fight." The basement's entrance exploded inward. Not picked, not breached, demolished. Concrete dust billowed through the gap, and through it came the drones. Sleek things, matte black optical sensors sweeping the room in patterns that suggested intelligence well past automated. Behind them, soldiers in regime colors, rifles up, formation tight. Ben moved. His hand slapped the watch, and green light consumed him, a flash so bright it painted shadows on shadows. When the light died, something else stood where the kid had been. Taller, armored in green and black face, hidden behind a helmet that reflected the drone's sensors back at them. "Detain the anomaly," one soldier said into his comm. Assets secured, the green figure blurred. Not fast like speedster fast, but fast enough that the soldier's sentence died in a grunt as armored fist met tactical vest. The man went down. His partner swung her rifle up, but the figure was already moving a sweep that took her legs out and sent her sprawling into the drone formation. Batman moved into the chaos cape, spreading as he disappeared into smoke he'd deployed from his belt. A soldier fired blind rounds, sparking off concrete. Batman emerged behind him, nerve strike precise, and the man crumpled. Lex stayed at the console, still wiping data, but his other hand held a weapon now. Small, efficient, the kind of gun that said civilian with resources and willingness to use them. The green figure Ben had to be. Ben grabbed a drone from the air, crushed something essential in its chassis, and hurled it into two more. They went down in a tangle of broken rotors and shattered sensors. Another soldier tried to flank him. Ben spun faster than the armor suggested he should be able to move, and the soldier's rifle became a pretzel in his grip. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Regroup it." Batman's batarang took the speaker in the throat. Not lethal, just precise. The man gagged, dropped. The remaining soldiers retreated through the breach, dragging their unconscious with them. The drones that could still fly followed. 30 seconds, maybe 40, and the basement was theirs again. Silent except for breathing and the hum of Lex's console finishing its purge. Ben shifted back. The green light flared and faded, and he was just a kid again, breathing hard, looking at his hands like they'd surprised him. That was a welcome party. That was reconnaissance. Batman moved to the breach, scanning the street beyond. "Cyborg knows something came through. He'll send more." "Then we leave," Lex said. He shut down the console, pulled a data chip from a hidden slot. "The network in the East Tunnel system is still dark. We can move through there." Batman turned to Ben. His cowl hid most of his expression, but what showed through suggested a man doing math he didn't like the sum of. "You can't stay here. The regime doesn't ask questions, they requisition assets. You and that watch are both. So what's the play? You run." Batman pulled a small device from his belt, pressed it into Ben's hand. "This'll guide you to a safe house. Stay there. Don't use the watch unless you have no choice. Every transformation is a signal Cyborg can trace." Ben looked at the device, then at Batman, then at the breach, and the Gotham ruins visible beyond. His jaw worked. Whatever he was about to say died when footsteps echoed from the tunnel, fast, purposeful, coming closer. Batman grabbed Ben's shoulder, pulled him toward a different exit. "Move, now!" "What about, we'll buy you time, go." Ben went. Not because he wanted to, if his expression was any measure, but because the math added up the same way for him as it did for everyone else in this basement. He disappeared into the tunnel system with the device clutched tight, and Batman turned to face whatever was coming down the stairs. Lex raised his weapon. "How long do you think we have?" "Not long enough." The footsteps grew louder. The stairs creaked under weight that sounded human, but moved too precise to be anything but trained. Batman's hand found another tool on his belt. Smoke grenades, flash bangs, all the instruments of a man who'd been fighting this war too long to pretend it would end clean. The first figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Tactical vest, regime insignia, eyes cold behind a visor that probably fed him more information than Batman wanted him to have. 3 more behind him, same loadout, same expression. "The anomaly," the lid soldier said. "Where?" Batman didn't answer. Lex's finger tightened on the trigger, but didn't pull. Not yet. The soldier's visor swept the room. Whatever he saw made him key his comm. "Basement breach confirmed. Subjects Luthor and Wayne. Anomaly absent. Requesting immediate." Batman threw the smoke. Lex fired. The world became noise and obscured vision and the sound of trained men doing violence in close quarters. When the smoke cleared, 2 soldiers were down. One was bleeding from a leg wound that would need attention but wouldn't kill. The other wasn't moving, but still breathing. The lead soldier and his partner had retreated halfway up the stairs, rifles tracking through the dissipating haze. "Stand down," the lead said. "You're both designated." The wall exploded behind them. Not the entrance. The opposite wall, the one that should have been solid concrete backed by earth. Instead, it opened to night air and Gotham's ruined skyline, and through it came a figure in black and blue that moved like shadow given purpose. Batman. The real Batman, not the reconstruction the regime had built from his methods. He hit the soldiers from behind, cape spread, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and lost weapons. Lex stared. "Bruce, other exit." The word came out clipped. Batman. This Batman, the one who'd found the soldiers before they found Ben, moved to the console, scanned it. Seemed satisfied with what Lex had purged. "Kid. Tunnels. East. Good." Batman pulled a small charge from his belt, attached it to the mother box fragment. "This location's burned. 30 seconds, then we're gone." Lex grabbed his coat, the data chip. Nothing else. Batman set the charge timer and moved to the new breach he'd made, pausing only to look back at the basement that had served as workshop, safe house, and temporary rebellion headquarters for longer than it should have had to. Then the timer hit 5, and they were running concrete crumbling behind them as the charge took the mother box fragment and the speed force conduits and anything else that might tell the regime exactly what they'd been trying to do. By the time Cyborg's reinforcements arrived, the basement was rubble, and the tunnel system had swallowed 3 people who knew exactly how to disappear in a city that had forgotten how to let anyone hide. Somewhere in the dark, Ben Tennyson pressed deeper into tunnels that smelled like waste and defeat, one hand on the watch at his wrist, trying to understand what kind of world he'd fallen into where Superman was the enemy. And Batman looked at him like a weapon that might go off. Above them, Gotham broadcast its curfew warnings to streets that had learned compliance or learned to die trying. The war continued. It always did. "They're coming." Constantine didn't look up from the sigil he was carving into Tower of Fate's stone floor. Salt mixed with ash forming patterns older than most civilizations. Tennyson sat against the far wall, knees pulled up, one palm pressed flat against the Omnitrix, like he could will it into silence. The device hadn't stopped flickering since they'd dragged him through the wards 3 hours ago. "How many?" The question came from the shadows where the cowl waited, always watching, never resting. Does it matter? Constantine finished the outer circle, straightened with the kind of careful movement that suggested old injuries never properly healed. Superman's flagged this location. He won't send a squad. He'll send a message. Fate materialized at the chamber's center. Golden helm, reflecting candlelight that had no source. The Lord of Order's voice carried weight that made the air feel heavier. The wards will hold against conventional assault. Magic woven into this structure predates nothing Superman can't punch through if he's motivated enough. The vigilante stepped into the light. Cowl gone now, just Bruce Wayne in tactical gear that had seen better wars. We have minutes, maybe less. Tennyson's head came up. The circles under his eyes said he hadn't slept, probably wouldn't sleep, not here where every sound might be boots on stairs. You said this place was safe. I said it was safer. Wayne moved to the scrying pool Fate had activated, watching formations converge on their position. Drones in a grid pattern, ground forces in armored transports. Something larger moving above the cloud line. There's a difference. The pool's surface rippled. Images shifted Metropolis burning Atlantis under occupation. Themyscira's shores lined with regime flags. Then closer, Gotham's Eastern District buildings evacuated perimeter established. Not an arrest formation, an eradication perimeter. Constantine lit a cigarette despite Fate's disapproving silence. Luthor's intel said we had 48 hours before they triangulated the anomaly signature. Luthor's intel was optimistic. Wayne touched the pool's edge, and the view zoomed. Diana stood at the perimeter's forward position, lasso coiled at her hip, expression carved from stone. Behind her, tactical units in formation. Above her, Cyborg's scanner drones painting the tower with targeting lasers. They're not here to negotiate. Tennyson stood, joints popping in the quiet. Young but not stupid, reading the room like someone who'd learned early that adults lying about danger was a constant. What's the play? Evacuation. Fate raised one hand, and doorways opened in the walls. Not physical doors, but tiers in space leading to places that smelled like ozone and tasted like copper. I can scatter us across. The tower shook. Not earthquake. Worse. Reality buckling under external pressure as something very fast hit the wards very hard. Candles went out, came back, went out again. Constantine's cigarette fell from lips gone white. He's here. The words barely cleared Constantine's mouth before the wall exploded inward. Not the door, not a window, just wall becoming rubble as red and blue filled the gap. Capes settling like blood on snow. Superman hung in the breach, backlit by searchlights, expression empty of everything except certainty. The anomaly. Not a question. Statement of inventory. Surrender the device and we'll discuss terms. Wayne stepped between Tennyson and the Kryptonian. Small move. Meaningless in practical terms, but the kind of gesture that said some things mattered more than survival. There are no terms. You know that. I know you're harboring an extra-dimensional asset without regime clearance. Superman drifted forward, boots touching stone, each step measured like a judge approaching the bench. I know the device on his wrist represents technology we can't scan, can't predict, can't allow to operate outside oversight. His gaze shifted to Tennyson. I know that in a world still recovering from war, unknown variables kill people. So do tyrants. Wayne's voice could have cut steel. Difference is unknown variables don't pretend they're saving anyone. Superman's jaw tightened. For half a second, something flickered behind the red and blue, grief maybe, or the ghost of friendship murdered 5 years back. Then it died. Last chance, the device. Now. Tennyson's fingers brushed the Omnitrix. The watch pulsed green, then amber, cycling through colors that suggested internal argument. His face did something complicated, fear mixed with calculation, mixed with a specific brand of desperation that came from realizing every door led to a cliff. No, Superman moved. Faster than Tennyson could track, probably faster than Wayne could fully counter. But Constantine was already shouting words in a language that made the air scream. And Fate's hands were weaving patterns that turned space into a maze, and Wayne had something in his grip that sparked kryptonite green even though everyone knew he'd exhausted that supply years ago. The Kryptonian stopped. Not because of the defenses, those would slow him, not stop him, but because the wall opposite his entrance exploded outward, and Diana stepped through, wreathed in displaced brick dust sword already drawn. Enough theater. Wonder Woman's blade caught light that shouldn't exist in the tower's depths. We take the device, we leave. Anyone interfering joins the rest of the insurgency in processing. Processing. Constantine spat the word like poison. That what you're calling the camps now? Diana's expression didn't shift. Amazon warrior trained since childhood to make hard choices, convinced absolutely that her choices were correct. Containment facilities for enemy combatants. Standard wartime protocol. There is no war. Fate's voice boomed, helm blazing gold. There is occupation masquerading as peace. Then you've chosen sides. Diana raised the blade. Unfortunate. She moved like poetry written in violence. Fate threw barriers golden light that should have held gods, and Diana cut through them. Constantine's binding sigil flared and died against the lasso of truth wrapped around her offhand. Wayne launched something that sparked against her bracers and accomplished exactly nothing. Tennyson slapped the Omnitrix. Light consumed the chamber. Not green this time, red-orange like sunset or fresh arterial spray. When it faded, something crouched where the kid had been. Reptilian, hunched skin like volcanic glass, heat radiating in waves that made the air shimmer. Heat Blast opened its mouth, and the tower's interior became an inferno. Diana blocked with her bracers. The flames washed over her, around her scorching stone, and melting Constantine's careful sigils into slag. Superman was already moving, grabbing Wayne, and hauling him back from the worst of it. Fate's shields held, but the ambient temperature climbed into ranges where human tissue started to fail. Heat Blast fired again. Concentrated beam this time aimed at Diana's sword arm. She twisted, deflected, and the blast carved a trench through the wall that opened to Gotham's ruined skyline 3 stories below. Stand down! Superman's voice cut through the roar. You're destroying a historical. You destroyed a world. Heat Blast's voice came out wrong, alien vocal cords wrapped around human rage. Don't lecture me about property damage. He fired at the ceiling. Stone cracked. The tower's structural integrity, already compromised by Diana's entrance, started to fail in earnest. Fate shouted something about load-bearing enchantments, but physics and magic were arguing, and physics was winning. Diana lunged. Fast enough that Heat Blast almost missed the counter. Almost. He rolled, came up with both hands blazing, and caught her mid-strike with a blast that would have vaporized concrete. She took it on the bracers, skidded back 6 feet, and smiled like someone who'd just confirmed a pleasant theory. You're holding back. She advanced again, sword low. Worried about casualties? Collateral damage? Another step. That's weakness. That's called not being you. Heat Blast threw everything he had. Not at Diana, at the floor between them. Stone became magma. The tower screamed. Somewhere below, support structures gave up trying to hold the weight of centuries and accepted gravity's invitation. Enough. Superman blurred. Grabbed Heat Blast by the shoulders and hurled him through the wall Diana had already perforated. The alien form tumbled into open air, trailing fire. And for 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then Tennyson hit the Omnitrix again. The light was different this time. Cold where Heat Blast had been heat. White where before there'd been color. It expanded to fill the hole in the tower's wall, spilling out into Gotham's night like dawn that had lost its way. When the light faded, something hung in the space where Tennyson should have been falling. Alien X, humanoid in the loosest sense. Skin like void, given texture dotted with points of light that might have been stars or might have been something stranger. White hands, white face, eyes green and empty and fixed on nothing. It didn't fall, didn't fly, just existed in defiance of gravity and sense. The tower went absolutely silent. Constantine stared. Fate's helm dimmed. Wayne's tactical mind was doing calculations that kept coming up error. Diana's sword dipped an inch, not fear, never fear, but the warrior's instinct that recognized when the battlefield had fundamentally changed. Superman floated in the breach cape, stirring in wind that couldn't reach him, studying this new variable with the focus he'd once reserved for saving lives. What is that? Trouble. Constantine found his cigarette somehow still lit and took a drag, with hands that wanted to shake. Big trouble. Alien X didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the tower or the people in it or Gotham burning below. It hung in space like a verdict waiting to be read, and the absence of action was somehow worse than anything it might have done. It's not attacking. Diana's grip shifted on the sword. Seize it while. Don't. The word came from Wayne, urgent in a way he rarely allowed himself to sound. Look at it. Really look. They looked. Saw what he'd already processed, the way space bent slightly around those white hands. The way light moved wrong near its surface. The way looking at it too long made the back of the brain suggest that reality was negotiable, and maybe always had been. It's thinking. Wayne's voice dropped to something approaching wonder, or deciding, or get clear. Superman's tactical instinct overrode curiosity. Everyone back, now. He moved toward Alien X's hand, extended like he could just grab it, and haul it to processing like every other problem he'd solved with overwhelming force. His fingers came within 6 inches of that star-dotted surface. Reality pushed back. Not violent, not explosive. Just a sensation like the universe politely but firmly suggesting that physical contact would be inadvisable. Superman's forward momentum died. He hovered there, arm extended, expression shifting through several variations of confusion before landing on something colder. Force field. Worse. Fate's voice carried genuine unease. That's not technology. That's an autonomous reality assertion. The being itself is rejecting interaction. Then we adapt. Diana raised her sword. Magical weapons bypass. No. Fate moved between her and the entity with speed that suggested actual concern. Listen to me. That thing isn't human, isn't meta-human. It's something from a different category of existence entirely. If we attack it while it's in this state, while it's vulnerable, Diana corrected, while it's undecided. Fate's helm blazed. There's a difference. And if we force a decision before it's ready to make one, the tower won't be the only casualty. Superman drifted back, never taking his eyes off Alien X. The entity remained perfectly still. Not frozen stillness implied potential movement, but static in a way that suggested movement might not be a concept it currently acknowledged. Cyborg. Superman touched his comm. Analysis. Cyborg's voice crackled through. Sir, I'm reading energy signatures that don't match any database. Quantum states fluctuating like it can't decide if it's matter or something else. Attempting to scan internal structure, but the readings keep static. Something's wrong. The longer I observe it, the more my sensors degrade. It's like looking at it damages the ability to look at it. Recommendation, silence on the line. Then, containment, immediately, before it finishes doing whatever it's doing. Diana stepped forward. Superman raised a hand that stopped her mid-stride. Not a command between allies, orders from a superior who'd stopped pretending otherwise years ago. Fall back. Establish perimeter at 1/2 mile. Deploy suppression drones, but do not engage. His gaze tracked to Wayne, to Constantine, to Fate. You three, tell me what we're dealing with. We don't know. Wayne's honesty was tactical. Lies wouldn't help here. Tennyson's device accessed something. This is the result. And it's doing what exactly? Existing. Fate moved closer to Alien X, studying it with the caution of someone who'd seen gods and knew this wasn't one. But not acting. The consciousness is present, but not unified. Like a committee arguing jurisdiction, Superman processed that. His jaw worked. How long will it stay like this? Unknown. What happens when it decides? Fate turned to look at him. The golden helm revealed nothing but the silence at everything. Diana broke it. We cannot allow an uncontrolled entity to. The tower chose that moment to give up. The damage heat blast had done the structural compromise from multiple breaches, the magical infrastructure Fate had been maintaining through sheer will. It all reached critical mass simultaneously. Stone screamed. Enchantments failed. The chamber floor buckled, and reality's fabric, already stressed by Alien X's presence, tore along seams nobody had known existed. Out! Wayne grabbed Constantine, hauled him toward the spatial tears Fate had opened earlier. Diana was already moving, cape-snapping as she dove through the breach she'd made. Superman started toward Alien X and stopped when every instinct he had left screamed abort. The entity remained perfectly still while the tower collapsed around it. Stone fell through where it hung, passing through empty space, like the alien form occupied a different layer of existence. The structural failure spread cascading, and in 10 seconds, the Tower of Fate went from mystical fortress to rubble that would take forensics teams months to process. When the dust settled, Alien X hung in the open air above the ruins. Still motionless, still silent, still very much present and very much not attacking anyone. Superman floated at a careful distance, comm active. Perimeter established. Affirmative. Cyborg's voice. Drones positioned. Ground forces holding at half-mile mark. Sir, whatever that thing is, it's generating a field that's degrading our surveillance equipment. The closer the drones get, the more they malfunction. Maintain position. I want eyes on it at all times. Copy. Sir, what do we do if it moves? Superman watched the entity. Watched it do nothing. Felt the specific dread that came from enemies he could break and problems he couldn't punch. Escalate. He turned from Alien X and descended to where Diana stood directing cleanup crews. The tower's ruins smoked gently. Insurgency fighters scattered during the collapse were being rounded up. Wayne had vanished, Constantine too. Fate's signature was gone from every scanner. But Tennyson was in there. Inside that thing. And until it moved, until it acted, until they understood what category of threat they were facing, the regime would wait. Diana sheathed her sword. We should have struck when we had the opening. We didn't have one. Superman pulled up a holographic display showing Alien X from 6 angles, all degrading. That's not an opponent. That's a condition. And conditions don't respond to force the way enemies do. Then what's our move? He considered the entity floating above the ruins. Considered a world he'd built on the principle that overwhelming power applied correctly could solve any problem. Considered the possibility that he'd just encountered his first real exception. We learn. He closed the display, and we prepare for when it decides to teach us. In the ruins below, buried under enchanted stone that still hummed with residual magic, the Omnitrix's signal pulsed once, twice, then went dark as whatever was happening inside Alien X continued happening in spaces human technology couldn't measure. Above Gotham, drones circled a being that hadn't moved in 17 minutes and counting. Inside that being, 3 voices argued jurisdiction, and in safe houses scattered across the city, the remains of the insurgency tried to calculate how you fought something that might not acknowledge fighting as a valid concept. The war continued. But the rules had just become negotiable. The street bent wrong. Constantine stood at the edge of what used to be Gotham's financial district, watching gravity decide it no longer felt like pointing down. A courier bike hung 3 feet above the pavement rider, still peddling expression locked in confusion that hadn't had time to become fear. Behind him, a storefront's windows showed reflections from yesterday, people who'd walked past 24 hours ago, frozen mid-step in glass that didn't know what time it was. Tennyson crouched beside a lamppost that couldn't decide if it existed. The metal flickered between solid and transparent humming with a frequency that made teeth ache. His wrist bore the Omnitrix green dial pulsing in patterns that suggested internal argument. How bad? The kid's voice stayed level. Good survival instinct. Worse than bad? Constantine pulled a cigarette from a pack that had 3 left this morning and 2 left now. Time worked differently here. This isn't damage from the tower collapsing. That just reopened wounds we'd barely stitched shut. Fate materialized beside them, golden helm dimmed, to avoid drawing attention they couldn't afford. The Lord of Order studied the distortion with a focus reserved for threats that defied category. Year 3 left scars when Trigon and XYZPTLK tore at reality's foundation. We contained the damage, forced both entities into the void before they could unmake existence itself. Containment isn't healing. Constantine gestured at the courier at the windows, at a fire hydrant that was leaking water upward into a sky that couldn't decide what color it should be. We put a bandage on a puncture wound. Your mother box test run just ripped the bandage off. Tennyson processed this with the speed of someone who'd learned early that adults understating danger meant run. Can you fix it? No. Fate's admission carried weight. Lords of Order didn't say no lightly. Every attempt to stabilize the scar risks expanding it. Magic technology, physical force, all of it feeds the instability. The more we try to restore order, the more we teach reality that order is negotiable. The courier's bike dropped 6 inches, resumed hovering, dropped again. The rider's confusion had time to mature into proper terror. People are dying. Tennyson stood already moving toward the courier. We can't just... Constantine grabbed his shoulder. Listen to me. That man, he's caught between 2 time streams. You pull him out of one, you collapse both. Everyone in a 3-block radius gets to find out what it's like existing in 2 states simultaneously. So we leave him until we understand the pattern. Fate gestured and symbols appeared in the air, geometric forms that hurt to look at directly. The scar is spreading along specific vectors, not random, intelligent almost. Like it's searching for... The Omnitrix flared bright enough to paint shadows. Tennyson staggered, gripping his wrist. His face did the thing it did when the voices inside the device were shouting at each other. Constantine had seen possession before. This wasn't that. This was consensus trying to happen and failing. They're arguing. The kid's voice came out strained. About jurisdiction, about... He cut himself off, jaw working. One of them wants to act now. One says we don't have enough data. One says... The Omnitrix went dark. Tennyson blinked, coming back to himself like someone surfacing from deep water. That was new. That was very bad. Constantine flicked ash that fell up instead of down. Whatever's inside that watch, it's paying attention. And if gods are arguing about whether to intervene in Gotham, we're past the point where running helps. Screaming erupted from the adjacent block. Not pain confusion becoming panic, as physics gave up pretending to care about rules. Constantine moved to the corner, peered around it, and felt his threat assessment recalibrate everything. The entire block had become a maze of temporal displacement. Buildings stood at angles that shouldn't support weight. People ran in slow motion while others moved so fast they blurred. A woman reached for her child. The child was 6 feet away when she started 3 inches when her arm finished extending. Neither of them understood what had happened to distance. Regime forces had already established a perimeter. Not rescue positions, research positions. Soldiers with scanning equipment, drones painting the distortion with sensor beams. Someone in an officer's uniform taking notes on a tablet like this was data collection instead of catastrophe. Superman descended from above Cape, settling with the precision of someone who'd long ago mastered dramatic timing. He studied the chaos with clinical detachment, then touched his calm. Cyborg. Analysis. The voice came through clear despite the audio distortions warping everything else. Sir, the anomaly from the tower location has metastasized. I'm reading reality degradation across a 15-block radius. Causality breakdown, temporal fragmentation, spatial noncoherence. It's spreading at approximately 2 meters per hour. Can we contain it? Unknown. Every probe we send in either stops functioning or starts functioning according to rules that don't exist anymore. Sir? Cyborg's voice took on a tone that suggested genuine concern. This isn't like anything in the database. It's not an attack. It's more like infection. Superman's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. Calculation replacing immediate action. Pull all civilians to perimeter. Establish quarantine protocols. No one enters or exits the affected zone without clearance. What about the people still inside? They're already exposed. Retrieving them risks spreading the contagion. Superman's gaze tracked across the distorted block. We study it, learn its vectors, then we decide how to use it. Constantine felt Tennyson tense beside him. The kid had heard it too, that shift from solve to weaponize. Welcome to injustice, where even natural disasters became tools of the state. Fate raised one hand, golden energy briefly visible before he suppressed it. We should withdraw. Our presence here, a building 3 streets over, collapsed into itself. Not down, into. Space folding like origami made from concrete and steel. The screaming stopped abruptly, not because people died, but because sound couldn't figure out how to propagate through geometry that had forgotten what dimensions were. Tennyson slapped the Omnitrix. Wait, Constantine started. Too late. The transformation light wasn't green this time. Blue, white, cold, precise. When it faded, XLR8 stood where the kid had been sleek reptilian, built for velocity that made sound jealous. The alien form blurred, already moving before Constantine could finish objecting. XLR8 hit the distorted zone at speeds that should have been lethal. Grabbed the woman reaching for her child, hauled both of them back to stable ground in a fraction of a heartbeat. Returned. Pulled out 3 more. 5, 10. The scar responded. Reality buckled. Not gradually, catastrophically. The block's XLR8 was disturbing with his intervention started fragmenting faster. Temporal loops collapsed. Spatial constants renegotiated themselves. A storefront that had been flickering between states solidified, then shattered into configurations that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. He's making it worse? Constantine shouted. But XLR8 was already too deep, moving too fast, committed to saving people who might be better off in temporal suspension than whatever happened when you yanked them free. Fate threw up barriers. Golden light trying to contain the expansion. The scar ate through them like fire through paper. This is what I warned against. Every action we take feeds the instability. XLR8 pulled a man from a doorway that was trying to exist in 2 locations simultaneously. The man came free, but the doorway's collapse cascaded backward through the building's structure. Glass shattered upward. Support beams twisted through angles that made the eye water. The entire structure began folding into a space smaller than it should occupy. People were still inside. XLR8 dove in. Constantine lost sight of him in the chaos of bending reality. Seconds stretched. The building completed its collapse into impossible dimensions. Then blue-white light erupted from the center. XLR8 emerged carrying 4 people, adults. Children all alive, all screaming. He deposited them past the perimeter and spun back for more. The scar doubled its expansion rate. Fate's voice boomed across the zone. "Stop! Every life you save costs." A crack appeared in the air. Not metaphorical. Actual fissure in the fabric of reality, spreading like broken glass, and through it came colors that didn't belong in human visual spectra, and sounds that bypassed ears to write themselves directly into consciousness. XL. R8 froze. Literally stopped moving for the first time since transformation, staring at the crack he'd just caused by trying too hard to help. Superman was already issuing orders. Evacuate the outer perimeter. Establish secondary containment at half a mile. If the fissure expands, we go to scorched earth protocols. Diana's voice came through on his comm. Define scorched earth. Level everything in a 5-mile radius. Turn the entire zone into a crater deep enough that whatever's leaking through has nowhere to anchor. Constantine pulled Tennyson, reverted, now breathing hard, eyes wide with horror, back from the distortion's edge. The kid was staring at the crack like it was his fault, which technically it was. Intentions didn't matter. Results did. I was trying to... I know. Constantine's voice came out harsher than intended. And now they're dead anyway, plus 20 more who got caught when you disrupted temporal stasis, plus however many get erased when that crack finishes opening. Tennyson looked at him. Young face, old eyes, the expression of someone realizing good intentions, were a luxury this world had stopped honoring. What do I do? Nothing. Fate's helm blazed, but his voice carried exhaustion. That's the lesson here. In a system this broken, every action accelerates collapse. The only winning move is not to play. That's not... Tennyson stopped. Started again. There has to be. The Omnitrix pulsed. Not transformation. Communication. Internal debate made external for half a second, 3 distinct impressions hitting Tennyson simultaneously. Constantine saw the kid's face cycle through confusion, understanding denial, acceptance in the span of 3 heartbeats. They're still arguing. Tennyson's voice had gone quiet. About whether this qualifies. About thresholds and jurisdiction and... He looked up at Constantine, then at Fate. If they decide it qualifies, what happens? Fate turned to face him fully. The golden helm revealed nothing but the pause before answering, said everything. Then the decision won't be about saving this world. It'll be about whether this world is worth saving. Sirens wailed across Gotham as regime forces evacuated the outer zones. The crack in reality kept spreading slower now that no one was actively interfering, but steady. Inexorable. Superman floated above it all, directing resources, calculating acceptable losses, doing the math that turned human lives into strategic assets. Constantine lit another cigarette. 2 left in the pack, 1 left. The numbers didn't add up anymore. Nothing did. Tennyson stared at the disaster zone, at the people he'd saved, who were now exposed to secondary infection, at the people he'd killed trying to save them, at the fundamental equation that said helping and hurting had become the same action. I can't just do nothing. You can't do anything else. Fate gestured at the spreading fissure, at the collapsed buildings, at the reality infection, eating through Gotham's eastern district. This is the price of intervention in a world already past the brink. Every cure becomes poison. Every solution breeds 3 new problems. The only force that could stabilize this. He stopped, looked at Tennyson, looked at the Omnitrix. Isn't ready to act. And if we force its hand before consensus is reached, the cure will be worse than any disease we can imagine. Superman's voice cut through the calm chatter, addressing his forces with the certainty of a man who'd never learned to doubt his own judgment. Perimeter is secure. The anomaly is contained for now. We monitor, we learn, and when the time comes, we control it. Gotham has survived worse. Constantine almost laughed. Almost. Gotham had survived a lot. but Gotham had never faced a regime willing to weaponize reality itself. The crack kept growing. People kept dying in ways that made death seem like a kindness. And somewhere inside, a watch wrapped around a kid's wrist. 3 cosmic entities argued about responsibility while the world burned. Tennyson made a decision. Constantine saw it in the set of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared despite the weight pressing down. The kid raised the Omnitrix like he was going to trigger another transformation. Fate's hand shot out, stopping him. "Don't! Please! I have to try. You'll make it worse. It's already worse. And if you keep trying, it'll become irreparable." Fate's voice softened. "Trust me. I've watched worlds die because heroes couldn't accept that sometimes the right choice is restraint." Tennyson lowered his arm. Slowly. Like it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The crack stabilized. Stopped spreading. Not because anyone fixed it, because no one was making it worse. Superman issued new orders. Diana coordinated ground forces. Cyborg analyzed data streams. The regime machine adapted to the new threat, with the efficiency of a system that had long ago traded mercy for control. And in the ruins of Gotham's Eastern District, between broken time and fractured space, the infection waited for someone to give it another opening. The regime armory sat in what used to be Metropolis's industrial quarter. All reinforced concrete and surveillance grids, dense enough to choke air traffic. Luthor crouched on the adjacent rooftop tablet, glowing faint blue as he mapped patrol rotations. Wayne stood beside him, scanning thermal signatures through lenses that cost more than most safe houses. Tennyson waited 3 feet back, trying not to think about the last 48 hours. Trying not to see the courier's bike still hovering over broken pavement, or hear the screaming from buildings folding into dimensions that shouldn't exist. Trying especially hard not to remember Constantine's face when he'd said you killed them, trying to save them. "Guard change in 90 seconds. Luthor's voice came out clinical. No judgment, no emotion, just data. "Window closes fast, then we move fast." Wayne collapsed the lenses, turned to face both of them. "Lex gets the mother box components. I run interference. Ben." He paused. "Your backup and exit strategy. Things go wrong, you get Lex out. Nothing else matters." "What about you? I've been getting out of worse for 5 years." Wayne pulled his cowl up, became the vigilante again, became the symbol injustice hadn't managed to kill yet. "Focus on the mission. The components are in sub-level 3. Shielded vault biometric locks probably a kill box if we trigger wrong alarms. Lex cracks it, you cover him. We're gone before regime response mobilizes." Luthor stood shouldering a pack of equipment that looked too heavy to carry quietly. "Assuming Cyborg hasn't upgraded security since our last intel drop." "He has." Wayne's certainty carried the weight of someone who'd stopped hoping for easy. "But he thinks like an engineer. Redundancy over adaptation. We exploit that." The guard change happened below soldiers swapping positions with the precision of men who knew deviation meant reassignment to worse posts. Wayne moved first grapple already in his grip cape spreading as he dropped into the gap between sensor sweeps. Luthor followed. Tennyson went last, slapping the Omnitrix and letting the transformation take him before gravity had opinions. Stinkfly emerged, wings buzzing at frequencies human ears couldn't track, 4 eyes tracking angles the others couldn't see. He caught Luthor mid-fall, deposited him on the armory roof, and circled back to check their entry point. Clear, for now. They breached through a maintenance access Wayne had marked on the plans too small for regular patrols, too low priority for sensor upgrades. Inside smelled like recycled air and lubricant. Emergency lighting painted everything red. Luthor moved ahead some device in his palm that hummed soft interference at security nodes as they passed. 2 floors down. 3. The vault level opened to a corridor that looked more like a kill box than architecture. Automated turrets bracketed every 10 feet, motion sensors dense enough that walking through would be like swimming through tripwires. Wayne pulled a device from his belt, pressed it. The sensors flickered, came back confused about what they'd just been monitoring. 30-second window. They ran. Luther hit the vault terminal fingers, flying across haptic interfaces, while algorithms tried to lock him out. Wayne positioned himself at the corridor junction, watching both approaches. Tennyson reverted human again, feeling exposed in a building designed to make exposure fatal. How long? Wayne's question barely qualified as whisper. 2 minutes if the encryption hasn't updated. 5 if it has. Luther didn't look up from his work. Could go faster if I didn't care about triggering silent alarms. Footsteps echoed from the eastern approach. Not patrol too many, too coordinated. Wayne's posture shifted into combat readiness. We've got company. Keep them off me. The first soldier rounded the corner, and Wayne was already moving Batarang, taking him in the throat, non-lethal but incapacitating. The man went down choking. His squad mates opened fire. Rounds sparked off concrete as Wayne disappeared into smoke he'd deployed from somewhere in that endless belt. Tennyson triggered the Omnitrix. Upgrade flowed over him, liquid metal replacing flesh-tech symbiote, hungry for systems to infiltrate. He poured into the corridor's infrastructure, found the automated turrets, rewrote their targeting parameters in microseconds. The turrets swiveled. Opened fire on regime soldiers instead of intruders. Chaos erupted. Men dove for cover. Someone screamed about system compromise. Wayne used the confusion like a weapon emerging from smoke to drop another soldier with nerve strikes that left them twitching on the floor. "Vault's open," Luther called. Grabbing what we came for, the building shook. Not explosion. Worse. Specific. Controlled. The kind of impact that meant someone very strong had just made an entrance. Tennyson reformed human again, lungs working hard. Was that regime response? Wayne moved to Luther's position. How much do we have? Half the components. Luther was shoving crystalline tech into his pack with the speed of someone who'd practiced evacuation procedures too many times. The primary mother box interface and 2 stabilizer cores. Enough to maybe close the distortion. Not enough to prevent another one. Take what we have. We're leaving. Footsteps approached from both corridors now. Heavy. Deliberate. Tennyson felt his pulse spike when he recognized the cadence. Not soldiers. Someone worse. Nightwing stepped into view from the western approach. Eskrima sticks already crackling with electrical charge. Young face, old eyes. Damian Wayne wearing his father's legacy like a weapon. Behind him, tactical units and formation rifles up, trained on the vault. Father? Damian's voice came out flat, factual, like he was cataloging inventory. You're compromising regime security. Stand down. Wayne didn't flinch. You know I won't. Then you've made your choice. Damian moved forward, sticks spinning through forms that suggested lethal competence. The anomaly, surrender the device, and we can discuss reduced processing terms. Tennyson's hand went to the Omnitrix. I'm not... Ben, run! Luther's order cut sharp. Eastern corridor. Emergency exit 3 floors up. Go now. I'm not leaving you. You are. Wayne's tone allowed no argument. Because if Damian gets those components and we lose everything. Mission first. Always. Damian lunged. Wayne met him with the kind of defensive form that said he'd taught these moves years ago and now had to survive them. Sticks met gauntlets. Electricity arced. Father and son moved through combat that looked more like tragedy than violence. Luther grabbed Tennyson's shoulder, shoved him toward the eastern corridor. Move! Tennyson ran. Hated himself for it, but ran because the math made sense, and injustice didn't reward martyrdom. Behind him, sounds of fighting intensifying. Wayne calling defensive positions, Damian coordinating his units with the efficiency of someone who'd been trained to kill the people he used to call family. The eastern corridor opened to a stairwell. Tennyson took stairs 3 at a time, lungs burning, pack bouncing against his spine. Emergency exit coming up. Almost there. The wall exploded inward. Wonder Woman stepped through the breech sword, already drawn expression carved from stone. Behind her, more soldiers, more drones. The full weight of regime enforcement protocols made flesh. Enough running. Diana advanced blade low. You've caused enough damage. Time to answer for it. Tennyson backed toward the stairwell. Calculated angles. She was faster, stronger, better trained. Every conventional option ended with capture or worse. The Omnitrix pulsed. Not transformation request. Communication. Ben felt 3 distinct impressions hit simultaneously. Serena restraint. Minimize casualties. Bellicose survival requires decisive action. Ben. There's a third option, and for the first time since arriving in Injustice, all 3 impulses pointed the same direction. Tennyson triggered the transformation. Diamond Head emerged crystalline structure, refracting light into weapons. He slammed both fists into the floor, and the entire level's infrastructure became an extension of his body. Crystal erupted from concrete, from walls, from ceiling, not attacking Diana directly, but sealing corridors, collapsing support structures, turning stable architecture into a maze of sharp angles and failing weight-bearing columns. "What are you?" Diana started. The floor above them gave way. Tons of concrete and rebar crashed down between them, forcing Diana back, cutting off pursuit. But not just cutting off pursuit. The collapse cascaded, spread. Ben felt it through the crystal lattice, felt load-bearing walls failing, felt the entire eastern wing's structural integrity reaching critical threshold, felt people still inside. Soldiers, maybe 30, trapped in corridors that were about to become tombs. He could stop it. Could reinforce the crystal, redirect the collapse, give them time to evacuate. Could save them the way he'd tried to save people from the reality distortion. Could make everything worse. The Omnitrix pulsed again. Same 3 voices, same agreement. Serena wasn't arguing for mercy. Bellicus wasn't pushing for slaughter. They were both telling him the same thing. Commit to the choice. Wavering kills everyone. Tennyson reverted. Grabbed the pack. Ran through the emergency exit while behind him the eastern wing completed its collapse, with the sound of final decisions becoming permanent. He hit the roof. Transformed again. Stinkfly for mobility and cleared the armory perimeter before regime air support could establish intercept vectors. Flew low over ruins, using smoke and debris for cover, navigating by instinct and the location tracker Luther had given him weeks ago. The safe house came up fast. Tennyson dropped through a skylight, reverted, hit the floor, breathing like he'd just drowned and was learning air again. His hands shook. The pack felt heavier than it should. Batman emerged from the shadows 15 minutes later. Cape torn, fresh bruising visible through the cowl. Moved like someone running on spite and tactical stimulants. Lex, 2 blocks behind me. Lost the tail at Crime Alley. Wayne pulled the cowl off, became Bruce again. Exhaustion written in every line. Components. Tennyson held up the pack. Half what we needed. Luther's got the rest. Diana intercepted. He stopped. Started again. I brought the wing down. There were soldiers inside. I could have. You made the right call. The words hit harder than condemnation would have. Tennyson looked at him, at this man who'd been making right calls that felt wrong for 5 years, and saw his own future staring back. They're dead because I chose the mission. They're dead because injustice put them in a building designated for security theater. Wayne moved to the window, watching approaches. You think I sleep clean? You think any of us do? This world ran out of innocent choices when Metropolis burned. Now we just pick the options that let us keep fighting. That's not... It is. Wayne's voice cut final. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop wasting energy on guilt that won't bring them back. Luther arrived 20 minutes later. Pack intact, data chip loaded with technical specs they'd pulled from vault terminals. He dumped components on the table and started cataloging immediately. No questions, no discussion of casualties, just mission assessment and next steps. Tennyson sat against the wall, one hand on the Omnitrix. The device pulsed steady. No argument, no debate. For the first time since transformation became possible, the three voices inside weren't fighting. They were aligned, not happy, not vindicated, just ready. Ready for the decision they all knew was coming. Ready for the moment when restraint stopped at being viable and action became inevitable. Wayne's comm crackled. Superman's voice came through on the open channel, not directed at them, but broadcast to all regime forces. Insurgency attack on Armory Sigma has been contained. Casualties approximately 30 personnel, structural damage extensive. The anomaly subject is confirmed hostile asset. Rules of engagement updated, detain or eliminate. No negotiation protocols authorized. Tennyson felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. He'd crossed over, stopped being a kid who fell through the wrong portal, and became a combatant in a war that didn't believe in spectators. Wayne met his eyes across the safe house. No sympathy, no judgment, just acknowledgement. "Welcome to injustice," he said. "You're one of us now." Outside, sirens wailed. Drones circled. The regime machine processed the attack, updated threat assessments, calculated response protocols. Somewhere in a command center, Superman studied casualty reports and confirmed what he'd predicted. Everyone breaks their own rules eventually, and in a safe house that smelled like defeat and determination. Three voices inside an alien device agreed on jurisdiction for the first time since arriving in this broken world. The consensus wasn't complete, but it was forming. The device shouldn't have activated at all. Batman stood in the ruins of the safe house, watching holographic projections flicker through data streams that made no sense. Mother Box signature detected. Speed Force resonance confirmed. But the components they'd stolen were in pieces on the table, incomplete, nowhere near operational threshold. "They have the rest." Lex's voice came through the comm, strained. "Regime recovered the vault's secondary cache. They're running it." "Running what?" Ben asked. He'd been awake 70 hours straight, cycling through transformations to keep patrols off their backs. Every muscle ached, with the specific fatigue that came from pushing alien biology past recommended limits. A modified activation sequence. Lex's keystrokes clattered through the connection. They're not trying to pull another Justice League. They're weaponizing the scar, using Speed Force energy to destabilize reality at strategic coordinates. The holographic display shifted. Red markers appeared across the globe. Metropolis, Coast City, Themyscira's territorial waters, each one pulsing with the same signature as the financial district distortion. Batman's expression went very still. "How many?" 15 confirmed zones, expanding hourly." Lex paused. "This isn't accidental activation. Someone authorized deliberate deployment." Ben stared at the map. 15 cities experiencing what he'd seen in the financial district. Buildings forgetting physics. Time becoming negotiable. People caught between states that shouldn't coexist. Multiply that horror by 15 and climbing. Superman. Batman's certainty carried no satisfaction. "He's betting we can't respond to multiple crises simultaneously." "He's right." Lex transmitted updated coordinates. "Insurgency assets are scattered. We've got maybe 40 operatives capable of reality zone work. Regime has thousands. They establish perimeters, collect data, and wait for us to exhaust ourselves trying to save everyone." The display zoomed to Metropolis. Superman hung above the distorted zone, addressing crowds through amplified speech that carried across kilometers. The visual was too degraded for detail, but the body language read clear absolute authority, explaining acceptable losses. "He's using this." Ben's voice came out flat. "Demonstrating control, while the world breaks. Effective strategy. Batman closed the holographic feed. We need a decision. Where do we commit resources? Which means, where do we abandon? Ben stood pacing the cramped space. XLR-8 could cross continents in minutes. Upgrade could interface with containment systems. Diamond Head could stabilize structures. But only one target at a time. Only one disaster addressed, while 14 others accelerated. The device on his wrist pulsed. Not voices this time, just awareness, presence. 3 entities watching him do math with human lives. Batman pulled up a tactical overlay. Metropolis is lost. Superman's established martial law. Any intervention there becomes a direct assault on regime authority. Coast City has the highest civilian density and active distortion, 30,000 trapped in temporal flux. Themyscira's waters are pulling Atlantean vessels into spatial fractures. Arthur's trying to maintain neutrality, but his people are dying. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to face what we already know. We can't save them all. So we save who we can and accept the cost. Ben studied the display. Coast City maximum casualties prevented. But regime forces were already establishing research stations around the perimeter. They'd contain it eventually, study it, learn from it. Themyscira lower population density, but pulling Atlantis into the conflict. Forcing Aquaman to pick sides in a war that had already broken the surface world. Metropolis Superman's stage. The place where he'd built his ideology from ashes and grief. Going there wasn't rescue. It was confrontation. Coast City. The words came out before full analysis completed. Highest concentration of trapped centrifugal. If we move now, the hologram flickered. New data streaming in. Batman's jaw tightened as he processed the update. Regime just diverted 3 aerial squadrons to Metropolis Distortion Zone. They're not containing, they're harvesting. Harvesting what? Temporal fragments, reality samples, whatever they can extract before stabilization. Batman switched feeds. Superman's not waiting for us to respond. He's making our non-response meaningful. The decision crystallized with ugly clarity. Commit to Coast City. Save 30,000, let regime weaponize Metropolis. Commit to Metropolis, challenge Superman. Directly leave Coast City's thousands in temporal stasis that would eventually collapse. Commit to Themyscira, prevent Atlantis from entering the war. Abandon both others. No clean math, no optimal solution. Just varying degrees of failure dressed up as tactics. All 3? Ben triggered the Omnitrix, already moving toward the exit. I can hit Coast City first, stabilize enough for local response jump to Metropolis before regime finishes extraction, then you'll burn out. Batman's statement held no judgment. XLR-8 has endurance limits. You've been running transformations for 3 days straight. Push harder, and you'll hit physiological collapse mid-crisis. Then I collapse after the crises are handled. You assume they end. They don't. Regime keeps opening new zones until you're stretched beyond function. Then they move on you directly. Ben pulled the door open. So what's your alternative? Pick one and watch the others burn. Batman didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been making impossible choices so long, they'd forgotten what easy felt like. I'm saying understand what you're committing to. Once you start this, you become the solution. Every future crisis, every reality breach, every disaster regime manufactures, they'll all point to you. And when you can't save everyone, when the math finally breaks you, that failure becomes your identity. Already happened at the armory? Ben stepped into the street. Already chose the mission over people in that building. This isn't new. It's different. That was survival. This is responsibility. Batman followed him out. You accept this role. You stop being a kid who fell through a portal. You become the solution everyone demands and blames simultaneously. The Omnitrix pulsed again, stronger this time. Ben felt 3 distinct reactions. Serena acknowledged the burden, didn't argue against it. Bellicus recognized tactical necessity, didn't push for escalation. Ben understood he'd already decided. G-Tray burst from the transformation sleek and built for atmospheric travel. He shot skyward before Batman could offer more reality, before second thoughts could take root, before the math changed enough to paralyze. Coast City appeared on the horizon within minutes. The distortion zone glowed wrong colors against twilight, a wound in space that bled temporal fragmentation into surrounding blocks. Ben descended fast, already scanning for maximum impact intervention points. People moved in staggered time. A woman ran from collapsing architecture at quarter speed, while the debris fell in real time. A child reached for a parent who existed 3 seconds in the future. Fire burned backward, unburning what it had consumed, then burning it again in loops that would eventually exhaust the fuel, but take subjective years. Ben shifted form. Upgrade poured into the city's emergency systems, rewrote evacuation protocols, forced subway tunnels to become escape routes, even as spatial geometry tried to make tunnels occupy the same coordinates as streets. He pulled 200 people into stable zones, felt the distortion resist, push back, and reluctantly yield. 500 more still trapped. The distortion was learning, adapting. Every rescue taught it how to resist the next one. He switched again. Diamond Head to reinforce failing structures, give people enough stability to reach safe zones on their own. Crystal lattices spread through concrete, turning architecture into hybrid matter that existed partially in stable reality and partially wherever the distortion wanted to pull it. It bought time, minutes, maybe hours if he could maintain the reinforcement network across 40 blocks. He couldn't. Metropolis was already calling. Ben reverted human again, breathing hard enough that ribs ached. The Omnitrix glowed amber warning. Transformation fatigue approaching critical. Ignore it anyway. G-Tray again. Coast City receding. 30,000 saved became 30,000 at risk as the crystal network degraded without active maintenance. He'd given them a chance. Local authorities would have to make that chance count. Metropolis rose ahead, and with it the reality of facing Superman. On ground the Kryptonian considered sovereign territory. The distortion here was smaller, only 6 blocks. But regime presence was massive. Drones collected samples. Scientists in hazard suits mapped temporal currents. Superman directed operations from above voice, carrying through speakers that turned instructions into mandates. Acceptable losses within projected parameters. Continue extraction. Prioritize stable fragments for weaponization trials. Ben descended as Cannonbolt armored sphere built for impact. He crashed into the research perimeter. Scattered equipment forced regime forces to abandon collection in favor of defense. Rolled through sensor grids, demolished data gathering stations, made himself the crisis that demanded immediate response. Superman arrived in 3 seconds. Grabbed Cannonbolt mid-roll, redirected momentum into a building that crumbled under the impact. Concrete dust filled the air. Through it came heat vision, precise and surgical cutting through armor that could shrug off artillery. Ben reverted, shifted. Humongousaur emerged massive and strong enough to grapple with Kryptonians if rage replaced tactics. He charged. Superman met him head-on. The impact cratered pavement, sent shock waves through already unstable distortion zones. "You're making it worse." Superman's voice carried no emotion. Statement of observable fact. Every intervention destabilizes the gradient. You're accelerating collapse. Humongousaur roared, grabbed concrete with both hands, swung it like a bludgeon. Superman caught it, crushed it to powder, and drove a fist into armored ribs hard enough that Ben felt organs compress. "This is your choice." Superman pressed the advantage each strike measured. Spread yourself across 15 crises you can't solve, or accept that some disasters exceed individual response capacity. Ben shifted again. Ghost freak intangible slipping through Superman's guard to reach the extraction equipment. He possessed the central processing unit, forced it to purge collected data, erase everything regime had gathered from weaponizing reality itself. Superman pulled him out with speed that suggested he'd been holding back earlier. Heat vision again, forcing Ghost Freak to abandon possession or burn. You can't win this tactically. Superman's assessment remained clinical. You're one person against an organization. Eventually you run out of transformations or energy or will. I just have to wait. Ben reverted. Human. Vulnerable. The Omnitrix pulsed red emergency reserves depleted. One transformation left before forced cooldown. One chance to make impact before becoming target instead of threat. He looked at Superman. At the distortion zone. At regime forces regrouping around him. Did math that came up catastrophically short? And felt the wrist device pulse differently. Not warning. Invitation. 3 voices speaking simultaneously, no longer arguing, pointing at the same conclusion. Not yet, but soon. Ben triggered the final transformation. Big chill phasing through Superman's immediate retaliation, spreading ice across extraction equipment to destroy what possession couldn't erase. Froze sensor arrays. Disabled collection drones. Made the research station inoperable for long enough that whatever data remained couldn't be recovered quickly. Then fled before Superman could adapt tactics to counter intangibility. The Mascara's waters called. Aquaman's forces drowning in spatial fractures. Another crisis. Another failure. Another choice about who lived based on factors too complex for clean assessment. The Omnitrix shut down. Cooldown initiated. Ben fell from the sky as human teenager caught himself with grapple equipment Batman had insisted he carry and hit the ground running on legs that threatened to stop supporting weight. Regime forces closed in. He'd made noise-caused damage, saved some, and abandoned others. Done exactly what Superman predicted, exhausted himself against systematic opposition. Batman's voice crackled through the comm. Themyscira's handled. Arthur committed forces. Regimes pulling back from Atlantean waters. Coast City. Silence. Then, containment established. Casualties lower than projected. You bought them that. Metropolis. Superman's claiming victory. Research data partially destroyed but enough samples recovered for analysis. Batman paused. You slowed them, didn't stop them. Ben collapsed against an alley wall, lungs working too hard, muscles burning with lactic acid from running transformations past safe limits. 15 zones. He'd touched 3, made impact at 2, failed to prevent regime from achieving objectives at any. The math spoke clearly insufficient. The device on his wrist pulsed once. Steady, patient. Waiting for the moment when insufficient became intolerable. He's baiting you. Batman's assessment came through quiet, forcing scenarios where conventional response fails, leading you toward the conclusion that you need escalation. He's succeeding. Ben closed his eyes. Because he's right. I can't be everywhere. Can't solve every crisis. Can't stop him from breaking the world faster than I can patch it. So what's your next move? Ben felt the 3 voices humming beneath conscious thought. Felt Serena's acceptance that intervention costs were approaching the threshold, where inaction became worse. Felt Bellicus's readiness to commit overwhelming force. Felt his own exhaustion with halfway measures that saved some while abandoning others. I stopped pretending there's a clean solution. He stood legs protesting. And I start accepting that stopping Superman might require becoming something worse. The comm went quiet. Batman didn't argue, didn't approve, just acknowledged what they both understood. The clean war ended years ago. Now they just fought with whatever weapons didn't disintegrate in their hands. Across the globe, 12 distortion zones continued spreading. Regime forces harvested data from each learning to weaponize reality itself. And in a quiet moment between deployments, 3 cosmic entities inside an alien device reached preliminary consensus. Not complete, not authorized for action, but aligned on the fundamental question. Intervention thresholds existed, and injustice was approaching them fast. Ben limped toward the extraction point, every step an argument against the person he'd been when the portal opened. That kid believed in saving everyone. This version understood that saving anyone required mathematics colder than heroism allowed. The transformation was nearly complete. All that remained was the decision to acknowledge it. Silence had texture here, not absence of sound-active pressure, like atmosphere made from waiting. Ben existed in a space that shouldn't be possible, standing on nothing surrounded by everything. Starfield above. Starfield below. Starfield in directions geometry didn't acknowledge. 2 figures faced him across the void. Serena manifested as presence rather than form. Voice like measured certainty, the kind that came from witnessing civilizations rise and fall. And understanding both were temporary. You've brought us here deliberately. Yes. His voice felt small, human, inadequate for conversations held at cosmic scale. Bellicus occupied space like a declaration of war that hadn't decided its target yet. Energy crackling at edges that might have been shoulders, might have been weapon systems. State your threshold assessment. Outside this space, outside the space, where 3 minds shared one impossible body, the world continued breaking. 15 reality distortions spreading hourly. Regime harvesting fragments of broken physics to weaponize causality itself. People dying in ways that made conventional death seem merciful. Ben had counted. Done math. Projected casualties if the spread continued at current rates. The numbers made concepts like acceptable loss obscene. The infection is accelerating. He kept his voice level. Facts, not pleas. Regime isn't containing it. They're cultivating it, using reality breakdown as research material. We've observed. Serena's acknowledgement carried no judgment. The question is threshold classification. Does this qualify for intervention, or does it remain an internal matter for this iteration of Earth to resolve? People are trapped between time streams. Children existing in 3 states simultaneously. Entire city blocks forgetting what dimension means. Ben stopped, started differently. If this spreads beyond containment, it already has. Bellicus cut through hedging with the efficiency of someone who'd spent eons watching mortals avoid uncomfortable truths. 15 zones now. Projections suggest 40 within a week, 80 the week after. Exponential growth until the planetary reality substrate degrades past recovery threshold. Then you know we're past the point where conventional response works. We know. Serena's sound moved or space moved around her, bringing her presence closer without changing distance. The difficulty is determining appropriate scope. You're requesting intervention. We require specificity. What are you asking us to do? Ben had rehearsed this. Thought through every angle during the 70-hour cycle of transformations and failures. Knew the answer before entering this space. Quarantine. The word came out harder than intended. Seal the infection. Cut the vectors. Stop it from spreading beyond this Earth. That requires isolating an entire planetary reality. Bellicus stated it like inventory assessment. Severing dimensional connections. Making this world unreachable from adjacent realities. Yes, you understand what that entails. Serena's voice carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. No escape, no rescue from outside, no possibility of, no reset. Ben met where her eyes would be if she wore a form that had them. No going back. No pretending this didn't happen. The people who've died stay dead. The damage stays damaged. We just stop it from killing everything else. Silence filled the space between them. Not empty. Evaluating. You're not asking us to fix your world. Serena's observation came gentle, almost surprised. You're asking us to contain its failure. This world broke 5 years ago when Metropolis burned. Regime didn't cause that break, they built an ideology from it. Calcified trauma into governance structure. Ben's throat felt dry despite not having a physical throat here. I can't fix that. You can't fix that. But we can stop it from becoming a multiversal plague. Contain. Don't cleanse. Serena spoke it like confirming terms of contract. That's your threshold. That's my threshold. Bellicus surged forward, energy crackling like decisions made kinetic. And what of resistance? Superman won't accept external adjudication. The regime exists to reject exactly this kind of intervention. They'll fight. Let them. The words tasted like ash. They've been fighting reality for 5 years. Time they lost. You're authorizing force. I'm acknowledging necessity. Ben kept his gaze steady. Superman made his choice when he decided broken worlds were acceptable research material. I'm making mine. Bellicus studied him, or whatever passed for study among entities that existed partially outside linear time. You've changed. The version of you that arrived through the damaged portal wouldn't speak like this. That version hadn't watched people die because he tried to save them the right way. Ben felt something shift in his chest. Hadn't learned that sometimes the only choice is picking which failure you can live with. Can you? Serena's question wasn't rhetorical. Live with this, knowing what containment means. The people trapped inside will spend generations, possibly centuries, dealing with regime rule and reality degradation. You'll condemn them to that, for the sake of everyone else. Yes, the answer came without hesitation, without nobility, just mathematics executed at the temperature where heroism froze solid, and pragmatism was all that moved. Serena regarded him, for what might have been seconds or centuries' time, worked differently here. I have conditions. Name them. First, no retroactive alteration. We don't rewrite history to make this clean. The dead stay dead. The trauma stays real. Agreed. Second, no enforcement of morality. We seal the infection. We don't impose judgment on who deserved what outcome. Superman lives. The regime continues until internal forces dislodge it. Ben's jaw worked. Swallowing that took effort. Agreed. Third, you accept permanent association. Once we act, you become the entity who called down cosmic quarantine on Earth. Every person trapped inside will know you're responsible for their isolation. That burden doesn't expire. I know. Serena drifted closer still. Do you really? Because this isn't like the building you collapsed. Those soldiers died in war they'd volunteered for. This is millions of civilians who'll spend lifetimes in a cage you're asking us to build. I know. Repeated, steadier. And I'll carry that. Because the alternative is those millions, plus everyone in adjacent realities when the infection spreads through dimensional barriers. Acceptable. Serena's voice carried finality. My vote is authorization with stated conditions. Bellicus manifested weapons, or maybe always had them and was choosing to make them visible now. Energy coalescing into forms that hurt to perceive directly. My assessment, this world has weaponized its own existence. Appropriate response is excision from the greater pattern. Vote authorization. They turned to Ben. Both of them, waiting. You have to vote too. Serena explained it like teaching procedure to someone unfamiliar with councils that decided planetary fate. 3 voices, 3 votes. Consensus requires unanimity. Ben looked past them, through them, at the space beyond space, where reality thinned enough to show what lay underneath. Saw Earth turning. Saw distortion zones glowing like wounds. saw regime drones harvesting pieces of broken causality while people screamed in temporally displaced layers. Saw Superman directing it all with the certainty of someone who decided his trauma justified everyone else's. Authorization. His voice didn't shake, didn't triumph, just confirmed what math demanded. With Serena's conditions, we contain, we don't cleanse. We let them live with what they've built. The space between them collapsed, not violent. Orderly. 3 voices converging into singular purpose, with the efficiency of mechanism engaging. Ben felt himself dissolve, not dying, reorganizing, as Alien X assembled around the consensus they'd reached. Reality outside shifted, not dramatically. No light show, no announcement. Just fundamental alteration occurring at scales human perception couldn't track. Ben existed simultaneously in the void space and in his own awareness and in something larger that wore his choices like operational parameters. Alien X opened eyes that had never blinked, hands that had never struck, awareness that spanned planetary scale without effort. Time rippled, paused, continued differently. The distortion zone still spread. Superman still gave orders. Regime still harvested reality's broken pieces. But something had changed in the underlying structure. Some decision had been reached that couldn't be undone by anyone who didn't speak at cosmic scale. Batman stood in the ruins, watching sensors that had been tracking the anomaly suddenly report signatures outside conventional measurement. His tactical assessment updated threat level exceeded combat response options. Superman hung above Metropolis, directing harvest operations. Then stopped. Felt pressure change in ways Kryptonian senses could detect, but not identify. Looked up at a sky that looked identical, but registered differently. Across 15 distortion zones, regime equipment started failing. Not malfunction, deliberate rejection. Reality itself, developing immune response to external observation. And in space that existed between seconds, Alien X calibrated parameters for intervention that wouldn't save anyone, but might prevent total collapse. Quarantine protocols initialized, dimensional barriers reinforced, escape vectors sealed. No mercy, no malice. Just procedure executed by consciousness, large enough to treat worlds like organisms, requiring isolation. The mechanism activated. Earth didn't feel different to the people trapped inside. They still fought, still died, still struggled against regime authority or obeyed it depending on calculation. But outside, in the spaces between realities, in the currents that connected iterations of existence, doors closed. Roots sealed. This world became island, contained, no longer spreading. No longer rescuable, just existing in the space it had carved for itself, with the consequences it had built, until internal forces changed it, or entropy claimed it. Alien X didn't celebrate, didn't mourn, didn't justify. Just confirmed threshold met procedure executed, consensus fulfilled. And somewhere deep in the configuration where Ben's awareness remained distinct enough to think he felt the weight settle. Not guilt, not pride. Just acknowledgement. He'd asked for this, voted for it, accepted every condition. The people trapped here would live and die under regime rule, surrounded by reality that degraded a little more each year, knowing someone had decided their world wasn't worth saving, only containing. And he'd carry that forever, because some choices weren't about being right. They were about being willing to make them anyway. Consensus achieved, authorization granted, quarantine active, and the war continued behind walls that no conventional force could breach. Playing out its bitter endgame in isolation, while the rest of existence learned to root around the infection. The decision was made. All that remained was enforcement. The entity stood above Metropolis, where Superman had built his ideology from ashes, humanoid in the loosest sense. Skin like void decorated with distant stars, hands bleached white against cosmic dark. It hadn't moved since manifesting just existed, in defiance of gravity and time, hovering at the exact altitude where Superman typically addressed his city. Below, regime forces evacuated. Drones fell from the sky systems, rejecting their own programming. Surveillance networks experienced cascading failure as infrastructure encountered presence they couldn't categorize. Cyborg's voice crackled through compromised channels reporting sensor degradation, quantum state fluctuations, reality framework, instability. The Kryptonian arrived at speeds that should have been lethal to atmosphere, stopped 10 meters from the entity. Close enough to see those green eyes that tracked nothing, revealed nothing, promised nothing. You're interfering with lawful regime operations. Superman's voice carried across the city, despite wind shear that should have stolen words at this altitude. Stand down, or face appropriate response. The entity's gaze shifted. Not quickly. With the deliberate precision of something that didn't experience urgency because urgency was a concept it could simply unmake. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere simultaneously, not loud, pervasive. Judgment is not emotional, it is procedural. Superman's jaw tightened. I don't accept your authority here. Authority is not requested. Assessment is complete. This world has been evaluated. Quarantine protocols are active. Heat vision lanced across the gap between them. Concentrated energy hot enough to vaporize steel, precise enough to cut through reinforced structures. The beam struck the entity's surface and stopped. Not reflected. Not absorbed. Simply ceased being relevant to the space the entity occupied. Superman pressed harder. The beam intensified until air itself started to burn. The entity remained unchanged. You don't get to decide this world's fate. Superman cut the beam already moving. Speed that fractured sound barriers, fist cocked back with force that could shatter mountains. The impact should have registered. Instead, Superman's momentum inverted mid-strike. Not deflected, reversed. He found himself traveling backward at the same velocity he'd attacked, forced to compensate, to redirect, to process what had just happened, to inertia itself. Physical force operates according to established parameters. The entity's pronouncement came without inflection. Those parameters no longer apply within quarantine boundaries. Superman came in from a different angle. Multiple strikes varying force testing for weakness in whatever field protected this thing. Each blow met the same result: reversal. Negation. His own strength becoming limitation rather than weapon. What are you? The question emerged through gritted teeth. Classification, celestial, sapien. Function, reality, stabilization through isolation protocols. Your world's infection threatens adjacent dimensional structures. Corrective measures are mandatory. My world isn't infected. It's being rebuilt. Superman circled, calculating. You see chaos. I see necessary reconstruction. Order from ashes. Peace enforced because peace requested failed. Observation confirmed you've weaponized trauma. Built governance from grief. Imposed singular vision on populations requiring plural consent. The entity turned its head fractionally enough to track movement. This constitutes systemic failure. Superman stopped circling. I've saved millions, prevented wars, eliminated threats that democratic processes couldn't address. Every action has been for control masquerading as care. The entity's assessment cut clinical. You are not enemy, you are symptom. Rage flared behind blue eyes. Superman dove forward, grabbed the entity's shoulders, or tried to. His hands passed through solid matter as if it had decided solidity was optional. Before he could adjust, the entity simply was holding him instead. Not roughly. With the same impersonal efficiency something might use to examine a specimen. You believe strength validates method. It does not. Strength absent consent creates only dependency or resistance. You have achieved both simultaneously. The mathematics are unsustainable. Superman wrenched free or was released hard to distinguish which. He put distance between them, breathing hard despite Kryptonian endurance that rarely acknowledged fatigue. You talk like you understand this world. You don't. You weren't here when Metropolis burned. When Joker proved that mercy kills. When I learned the only thing worse than using power is having it and watching everyone die because you hesitated. Trauma acknowledged. Trauma does not grant license for permanence. The entity drifted closer. Movement without motion, position changing, while body remained static. You built authority from pain. Now pain is policy. This is why quarantine is required. Batman watched from 3 kilometers away. Perched on a structure that had survived 5 years of regime rule through strategic insignificance. Through lenses that barely functioned near the entity's presence, he tracked combat that didn't follow combat rules. Superman wasn't losing because he was weak. Superman was losing because the arena itself had stopped recognizing his advantages as relevant. Every strength became neutralized. Speed met temporal adjustment. Force encountered spatial reorientation. Heat vision died against frameworks that simply declined to acknowledge thermal energy as meaningful input. And the entity just existed, evaluating, processing, executing procedures that treated planetary civilizations like organisms requiring medical intervention. Batman's tactical assessment kept revising downward. Threat mitigation impossible. Conventional response irrelevant. Outcome predetermined. This was what absolute power looked like when it stopped pretending it needed permission. Diana's voice cut through his calm. I'm engaging. Superman needs... Stand down. Batman's order came immediate. You can't help him. Nothing we have can help him. Then what do we... We watch, we learn, and we accept that some battles end before they begin. Wonder Woman didn't respond. Batman didn't blame her. Acceptance had never been part of her warrior training. Superman tried a different approach. Grabbed debris from below, massive structural fragments from buildings that had collapsed during distortion events, and hurled them with force that turned concrete into projectiles. The entity didn't dodge, didn't deflect. The debris simply stopped existing as it crossed into the entity's immediate vicinity. Not destroyed. Edited out of local reality. You're erasing matter. Superman's voice held something approaching recognition. That's not defense. That's rewriting. Correction adjusting parameters within authorized scope. Quarantine requires dimensional isolation. Matter crossing boundaries must be accounted for. It has been accounted for. Superman flew higher, looking for advantage altitude might provide. The entity rose to match him, maintaining exact distance. Not pursuing, maintaining. I won't let you cage this world. Permission is not required. Assessment has concluded. This iteration of Earth exhibits systemic reality corruption. Left uncontained corruption spreads through dimensional adjacencies. Quarantine prevents cascading failure across multiversal infrastructure. Those are words. Superman descended fast, building speed, converting altitude into kinetic weapon. Ideal in actions. He struck with everything he had. Every reserve of strength, every measure of velocity, channeling years of fighting impossible threats into a single, overwhelming impact. The entity caught him, not with effort, with the casual inevitability of gravity accepting falling objects. Superman's fist stopped centimeters from that star-dotted surface, kinetic energy dissolving into heat that dispersed harmlessly into atmosphere. Your strength is significant. Your conviction is absolute. Neither addresses the fundamental problem. The entity held him suspended, examination continuing. You have made yourself indispensable to a system that requires consensus. This is authoritarian calculus, not governance. It cannot persist without escalating oppression. We do not permit escalation. Superman strained against the hold. Nothing shifted. His power, his speed, his Kryptonian biology, all of it meant nothing against an opponent that could simply redefine what power meant in local space. What gives you the right? Rights are negotiated between parties with comparable standing. You are individual. I am collective. The negotiation is concluded before it begins. The entity released him. Superman caught himself, hovered at a distance that felt like retreat but was tactical assessment. However, explanation is offered. Not for your benefit, for procedural transparency. The entity gestured. Not with hands, with intention made visible. The air around them rippled, and suddenly they weren't alone. Images appeared. Not projections. Memories pulled from temporal record and displayed with perfect fidelity. Metropolis burning. Lois dying. Superman's face transforming from grief to rage to cold certainty. The moment where heroism calcified into authoritarianism. This is your origin point. The entity's narration came without accusation. Tragedy converted to mandate. From here, observe. The images shifted. Showed 5 years compressed into minutes. Showed Superman establishing the regime. Showed executions disguised as justice. Showed populations complying not from conviction, but calculation. Showed resistance, crushed dissent, criminalized mercy, redefined as weakness. Showed a world that had traded one fear for another and called it improvement. You believe you saved them. Assessment indicates you traumatized them differently. The mathematics remain unchanged. Suffering persists, only redistributed according to new parameters you control. Superman looked away from the images. I did what was necessary. Necessity is subjective. Outcome is measurable. The entity dismissed the temporal display. Your world is dying, not from war, from the medicine you prescribed. Regime authority has become the infection. We quarantine infections by trapping us here, making us unreachable. Superman's voice dropped. That's not salvation. That's abandonment. Correct. We do not save. We contain. Your world is permitted to continue within isolated parameters. What you do with that continuation is yours to determine. But you will not export your failure to adjacent realities. Superman's hands clenched. Unclenched. The specific calculation visible in his expression, could he win this? The answer coming back, no. The follow-up, what came after, no. If I stand down, you leave. Negative. Quarantine is permanent. Dimensional barriers are sealed. This world becomes island. What occurs within remains internal matter unless it threatens barrier integrity. And if I keep fighting, you will exhaust yourself against procedures that do not tire. Eventually, you will be forcibly removed from operational capacity. The quarantine proceeds regardless. Your participation is noted, but not deterministic. Batman heard it in Superman's silence, the moment where absolute certainty encountered immovable opposition, and had nowhere left to redirect. The Kryptonian hung there suspended between attacking and accepting, while the entity waited with patience measured in geological time. Then Superman made his choice. He attacked everything he had. Heat vision and speed and strength and desperation. Tried to overwhelm through sheer persistence what couldn't be overcome through power. The entity received each assault with the same measured response negation. Reversal, adjustment. Superman's heat vision bent back on itself. His punches inverted into restraints. His speed became anchor. Every weapon in his arsenal turned into demonstration of futility. And through it all, the entity remained unchanged, unmoved, unimpressed. Not because Superman was weak. Because the rules had changed and Superman's playbook no longer applied. Batman watched Superman fail. Watched the moment where the strongest person in the room discovered that strength had limits. That some problems couldn't be punched into submission. That when reality itself disagreed with you, force was just theater. The entity raised one white hand. Superman froze. Not paralyzed. Locked. Every muscle, every ability, every measure of Kryptonian physiology suddenly subject to redefinition that said, movement is no longer permitted in your current state. Resistance is acknowledged, but irrelevant. The entity spoke with the finality of bureaucracy that had processed the appeal and denied it. You are being placed in non-operational status for the duration of quarantine establishment. This is not punishment. This is procedure. Superman struggled. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Could only exist in helpless awareness while the entity that had beaten him without fighting completed its assessment. The entity turned its attention from the Kryptonian to the city below, to the regime installations, to the surveillance networks and authority structures and all the mechanisms Superman had built to maintain control. And one by one, they began to fail. Not explosively, systematically. Lights going dark, systems shutting down. Authority dissolving as the infrastructure supporting it recognized new operational parameters. The regime didn't end. It just stopped being able to enforce itself. Batman activated his comm. It's done. Get everyone to shelter. Whatever comes next, we face it without regime oversight. Diana's voice came back uncertain. What about Superman? Batman looked at the frozen figure hovering beside an entity that had judged his world and found it requiring isolation. Superman lost, not to an enemy, to mathematics, to the cold assessment that some systems failed so comprehensively that saving them meant letting them fail in private. The entity completed its work. Regime command infrastructure neutralized. Dimensional barriers reinforced. Quarantine protocols approaching completion, and suspended in frozen observation, Superman understood what Batman already knew. The war was over. They'd lost to something that didn't hate them enough to destroy them, just contained them. Like a virus, the entity began final procedures. The sky stopped responding. Batman noticed at first sensors reporting zero connectivity to satellite networks that had been operational minutes ago. Then ground stations went silent. Then backup systems. Then the emergency channels designed to survive electromagnetic pulses and tactical nuclear strikes. Not destroyed, just absent. Like dialing a number and getting nothing. No busy signal, no error tone, just void where connection used to exist. Above Metropolis, Alien X hung motionless, while invisible mechanisms executed decisions made in spaces human consciousness couldn't access. The form showed no strain, no effort, just presence while dimensional barriers sealed with the finality of doors closing on a quarantine ward. Ben existed somewhere inside that configuration, aware but separate. Felt the sealing happening through senses he didn't have names for. Felt reality folding in on itself, cutting roots between this Earth and adjacent iterations. Felt the specific weight that came from watching escape vectors close one by one until none remained. Serena's voice came through internal spaces. We preserve what can still choose. Bellicus said nothing. Didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. And Ben stayed quiet because words wouldn't change mathematics that had already concluded. Batman activated his comm, knowing it wouldn't reach beyond planetary boundaries anymore, but needing to say it anyway. Alfred, can you still hear me? Silence. He tried again. Different channel, different encryption, same result. The Batcave, if it still existed in Earth Prime, was now as unreachable as another universe. Diana landed beside him on the rooftop, sword still drawn despite having nothing left to fight. The portals are gone. I can feel it. The Myskira. Her voice caught. I can't sense the connection anymore. None of us can. Batman deactivated his comm. We're isolated, permanently. Then we're trapped. We're contained. He watched Alien X drift lower, approaching Gotham's ruins, with the inexorable patience of glaciers. There's a difference. Wonder Woman looked at him. Warrior's assessment, trying to find the angle, the tactical option, the way through that military training, insisted must exist. Finding nothing. What do we do? Survive. Rebuild what we can. Try not to repeat the mistakes that brought us here. Batman's voice carried exhaustion that went beyond physical. and live with the fact that we're not getting rescued. Alien X descended into Gotham proper. The form passed through buildings like they weren't relevant, stopped in the district's center, and extended awareness across the population still cowering in shelters and safe houses. Batman felt it pressure that wasn't physical, but undeniable. Evaluation occurring at scales beyond human cognition. He'd planned for orbital strikes, chemical weapons, reality-warping attacks. Hadn't planned for being examined like a bacterial culture under cosmic microscope. Then Alien X spoke. Not to him specifically, to everyone. Voice arriving directly in consciousness without need for ears or language. Selection window 60 seconds. Diana's grip tightened on her sword. Selection for what? Batman understood before she finished asking. Evacuation. Limited scope. It's offering a way out for some. How many? Not enough. He activated the emergency broadcast he'd kept ready for scenarios exactly this catastrophic. All insurgency forces. Prioritize civilians. Children first. Non-combatants. Anyone without strategic value to remaining authority structures. You have 1 minute. The comm channels erupted. Questions, objections, people trying to understand orders that didn't make tactical sense. Batman cut through it. The entity is offering extraction for a limited number. We're sending those who can't fight, can't rebuild authority, can't perpetuate the cycle. Everyone else stays. That includes us. 50 seconds. Across Gotham. Insurgency operatives made calculations colder than any battle plan. Grabbed children from hiding spots. Pulled families from basements. Moved elderly injured anyone whose presence in a sealed world would be liability rather than asset. And left behind the fighters. The planners. The ones who knew how to build systems. Left behind everyone who might, given enough time and desperation, create another regime. Diana watched it happen through gaps in the skyline. Saw people being gathered in clusters, saw Alien X's awareness shift toward them. We're condemning ourselves. We're preventing export. Batman's tone allowed no argument. This world broke. We don't get to inflict that break on others. 30 seconds. Ben, somewhere in the merged consciousness, felt Serena's condition being enforced. No reset. No erasure of trauma. Just extraction of those who hadn't weaponized their pain yet. The calculation was brutal. It was also the only version of mercy that didn't require rewriting what had already happened. 20 seconds. Superman remained frozen above Metropolis. Aware. Unable to move or speak or object. Forced to witness authority dissolving without his input, watching the world he'd controlled being judged and found wanting. The humiliation of irrelevance was more complete than any defeat could have been. 10 seconds. The clusters of evacuees, maybe 2,000 total, scattered across 15 cities, began to shimmer. Not teleportation. Dimensional relocation. Being moved to adjacent realities where regime had never formed, where Metropolis still stood, where Superman was still a symbol instead of a system, where they could grow up without learning that authority and terror were synonyms. 0. They vanished. No flash, no ceremony, just absence where presence had been seconds before. And in the silence that followed, everyone left behind understood. They were the contamination. They were the ones who knew too much about breaking worlds to be trusted with access to new ones. Batman stood on the rooftop and felt the weight settle. Not guilt. Responsibility. He'd chosen who stayed and who left based on calculations that would haunt him until whatever end this sealed world provided. Chosen correctly. Chosen necessarily. Chosen in ways that made him exactly the kind of person who needed to be contained. Alien X completed the seal. Dimensional barriers locked. Mother Box signatures went permanently dark. Speed Force connections severed. Every route between this Earth and the broader multiverse closed with finality that exceeded death, because death at least implied an ending. This was continuation without escape. The form began to dissolve. Not dying, returning to wherever celestial sapiens existed when not imposing quarantine on failed realities. The stars decorating that void dark skin faded. The white hands lost cohesion. Awareness that had spanned planetary scale contracted back to human dimensions. Ben reformed in Gotham's ruins, human again, hitting pavement hard enough that knees buckled. The Omnitrix pulsed once confirmation, not celebration, then went dormant. No voices, no debate. Just silence where cosmic argument used to live. He stood slowly, every muscle aching with fatigue that wasn't physical. Looked up at the sky that was the same color it had been an hour ago, but fundamentally different. Looked at Batman watching him from the rooftop. Looked at the city that would spend generations dealing with consequences he'd decided were preferable to alternatives. Diana broke the silence. Is it done? Ben nodded. Couldn't quite manage words yet. And we're trapped. Another nod. For how long? Until internal forces changed the system. Batman descended from the rooftop cape settling around him like judgment he'd accepted years ago. Or until entropy claims us, whichever comes first. He approached Ben. Studied the kid who'd fallen through a portal and become the thing that ended the war by making victory impossible for everyone. You could have left. Batman's observation carried no accusation. Alien X could have taken you out with the others. I voted for this. Ben's voice came out hoarse. I don't get to run from it. No, you don't. Batman extended a hand. Welcome to the aftermath. It's worse than the war. Ben took it, shook once, released. They stood in ruins that wouldn't be rebuilt quickly, under a sky that wouldn't answer calls anymore in a world that had learned the hard way. That some infections couldn't be cured, only isolated. Somewhere in Metropolis, Superman remained suspended. Aware. Powerless. The man who'd tried to save the world by controlling it, now forced to watch that world continue without his input. Forced to exist as cautionary tale rather than authority. The regime infrastructure stayed dark. No surveillance, no enforcement, no central command issuing orders that claimed to be justice. Just absence where system used to be. And in that absence, people began making choices. Small ones. Tentative ones. The kind that came from realizing no one was watching anymore, because the watchers had been removed from operational capacity. Batman activated local comms, the ones that still worked because they'd never relied on external connectivity. All stations. Regime command is offline. Surveillance networks are dead. We're in transition period. Expect chaos. Prepare for worse. Responses came back scattered, confused. Some relieved, some terrified. All recognizing they were in territory no one had planned for freedom that came from being abandoned by everyone, including the people who might have rescued them. Ben listened to the chatter and felt the specific emptiness that came from winning by making everyone lose. He'd saved adjacent realities from infection. Saved countless worlds from experiencing what injustice had become, and condemned this one to live with its choices in isolation. No redemption arc. No healing montage. No moment where Superman saw the light and everyone forgave each other. Just containment. Just consequence. Just the cold mathematics of triage executed at cosmic scale. Diana sheathed her sword. What now? Batman looked at Gotham. At Metropolis. At the world that was theirs to rebuild or ruin without external interference. Now we see if we learned anything. Ben said nothing. The Omnitrix pulsed steady at his wrist. 3 voices silent. Consensus reached. Work complete. He'd carry this forever. The faces of people left behind. The children evacuated. The world sealed. Every decision that led here. But he'd carry it standing. Because some choices weren't about being right. They were about being willing to make them and live with what came after. The sky stayed closed. The world stayed contained. And in the ruins of Gotham, 3 people who'd helped seal their own world stood together in silence that didn't need filling. There were no heroes here, just survivors doing math with consequences. The quarantine held,